Showcasing how awful violence or war can be in video games hits two birds with one stone. It allows you to simultaneously have a lot of fun blasting bad guys, while also holding a mirror up to difficult and atrocious subject matter. Because combat is a very common activity in most genres, and generally the most fun part of a title, video games are especially well positioned to tackle violence as a theme. In a way, it's having your cake and eating it too. The most fun parts of fighting mixed with the narrative appeal of learning from it. As with any medium though, pursuing this kind of story has been done with varying degrees of success. One entry that fell on the lesser end of the spectrum was this. A lot of people don't like The Last of Us Part 2. A popular sentiment is that its anti-violence message, or more specifically, its anti-revenge message, is very on the nose. The game tries to be poignant by forcing you to do horrific acts to progress the story, at times seeming almost like a parody of how video games are formatted. And while it sounds like a neat idea on paper to pigeonhole someone into game tropes as a vessel for exploring bigger ideas, many found the narrative condescending, saying it was overly obvious in its message, and that it felt like it was bludgeoning the player over their own decisions that the game forced them to do in the first place. So it's very interesting that a title sporting a lot of the same narrative setups as that game, with a lower budget and almost arcadey gameplay, is able to not only usurp The Last of Us Part 2 in terms of storytelling, but many other AAA titles as well. Hotline Miami places you squarely in the middle of Florida's crime-ridden, heat-scorched city. Your protagonist, Jacket, is a highly skilled pawn in a larger game he doesn't care that he's participating in. Strange, uncomfortable phone calls are made to his residence, tasking him to take out local gangs in the area, with hints of blackmail and worse things to come if he doesn't comply. Revenge for events revealed in the second game drive his bloodlust towards the swarms of enemies he steamrolls. The top-down kill-or-be-killed, one-hit-and-you're-done combat is considered, nuanced, and deadly. The game could have leaned entirely into this and called it a day, but it's so much more than that. Bones crunch on steel-lead pipes, heads explode like confetti across the floor, and festivals of blood erupt from explosions that pierce your eardrums with white noise. These attentions to detail feel almost perverted. Yes, it makes the fights more satisfying to pull off, but the main reason they're made that way is to disturb and disorient the player. To quote the co-developer, "I feel that in a way it's a little bit irresponsible to portray the violence as something stylish, cool, or funny when it's really not. So we tried our best to make it look discomforting." So what exactly does Hotline Miami do differently than The Last of Us Part 2 that allows it to communicate its aberration for violence more effectively and less condescendingly? Several things. For one, it doesn't feel like there's a hand on the back of your head forcing you to stare at a puddle of blood. All the wreckage, carnage, and destruction you see in these levels is of your own making. You're simply backtracking your way through levels you've already completed, and seeing their bodies sprawled over multiple floors is just a side effect of getting to that point. It never comes off as preachy or pretentious because the gameplay and narrative are working in tandem to give you a cohesive experience. Last of Us 2's plot constantly wants you to feel at odds with yourself by making you progress the story through the eyes of characters you don't like, and foiling the characters that you do. I actually think this is a very compelling narrative decision and that the game achieves partial success with it in some areas, but the story so badly wants you to like certain people through exposition and slow, character-building scenes that it feels very forced. And that directly impacts how violence ties into the overarching narrative because the act of violence is now an unwanted, hamstrung event that feels very maliciously placed to make you like certain people in the game. If you want us to chastise violence through gameplay that involves it, dredging it under a ham-fisted story that very obviously wants to tug you in a certain direction will make it far less effective. Hotline Miami's gameplay loop is such a natural extension of the story that it's harder for anything to feel forced. The format certainly helps, making the main character a mute, tormented individual with a giant axe to grind certainly gives the developers the perfect context for taking out hordes of criminals. But story moments are interwoven very gently between stages, like the woman you rescue slowly inching her bed towards you as the game progresses, and Jacket deciding to clean his apartment when she starts living there. Little moments like these don't necessarily play into the overarching violence theme, but they give you enough context for the characters and themes of the game without making you feel like you're being screamed at over what to feel. There's no need to show us flashbacks of Jacket serving in a soup kitchen or attending church. It's all in the tiny set pieces between fights. But there's a little bit more to the atmosphere of Hotline Miami than just these. The soundtrack makes us feel the angst of waking up every day in this world. And just like the main character himself, the only time we're not thinking about how wretched and miserable everything is when we're in the middle of the action. It really does a fantastic job of merging the mood of the player and the character they control together, and effectively communicates Bloodspill as Jacket's getaway from the internal struggles he copes with. There are lots of games that pull this trick of syncing player and game cognition through the story instead of the gameplay. RPGs that have amnesia are a great entry point for a narrative because the person playing is coming in with the same knowledge as the protagonist, for instance. But Hotline Miami does the complete opposite by having the gameplay be both yours and Jacket's mental escape. In a way, the game is almost a parody of how little players question what the character they're controlling is doing. These themes of morality don't mean anything to us initially because as a participant, we're just looking for the path forward in the game. Whether or not this strategy is effective ultimately falls down to your taste. And it could understandably be written off as pompous, but for the reasons I've stated earlier, I think the developers managed to tell a compelling story that uses video games as the perfect container for the tale they wanted to tell. Through its tormented characters, smart pacing, and heart-wrenching conclusions, Hotline Miami shows us the consequences of getting involved in its criminal underbelly, the consequences of having violence be your only reprieve from mundanity. One character's involvement in organized crime ultimately ends in his girlfriend taking his money and running off, her justification that she can't trust him and that he would do the same because of his selfish and brutal pursuits. There is a very real and considered understanding of the ripple effects these things have on all of us. It's told pretty greatly, but it's not all perfect. If The Last of Us Part 2 is too on the nose, then Hotline Miami is the complete opposite. With tons of characters slipping in and out of reality, sleep, and drug-induced comas, it can be hard to not only understand what the game wants you to feel, but what the characters are doing at all, especially in the second game. Yet even with its at times overly complicated narrative, Hotline Miami 1 and 2 successfully asks us to explore not only what the underlying motives of our protagonists are, but what our own might be as well. Here's a video I did on 1001 Spikes. It's a common thing to say, definitely, but YouTube actually doesn't recommend my videos as much as they used to, so a comment, like, and subscription go a very long way in helping me grow. So if you enjoyed what you saw today, please do so. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.